Hi, welcome everybody. This is going to be a very exciting session for the Java community. We're going to hear some fantastic stats from a very recently conducted study. Joining me, Manish Gupta, Vice President of Global Marketing for Java and GraalVM at Oracle, is our guest, Chris Rommel, Executive Vice President at VDC Research. Welcome, Chris.
Nice to speak with you today.
Great. So Chris, why don't we begin with the background for the study that you guys have concluded recently?
Yeah, so this is actually a study we've been doing a number of years. And maybe actually even before I talk about that, I'll give you a little context for those of you who aren't familiar with VDC. So we are a B2B research and consulting firm that focuses on a lot of trends like software development, digging into the technology, what developers want, need, their preferences, expectations, and really what they're planning on how they look to adapt in the future. And we've been covering that space for 25 years and have had the privilege of working with both Oracle and before that Sun as well, looking at Java and the way that that plays in the ecosystem at large. And today, I'm going to show some results from a couple different long-running research projects that we've had with Oracle, as well as some things that even reach back before that as well. To that end, we've been doing one study looking at the different preferences and perceptions of a wide variety of different languages and platforms. We've been doing that with Oracle for the past 4 years, and we have some other research I'll be sharing that we've been going back for the past 6 years with Oracle as well, looking at the number of JVMs and devices and systems running Java as well. So we have a great base of research that we can look at and compare to see how the market is changing, how the needs of developers are changing year to year.
Yeah, it's very exciting. I've had a peek into the data, and it certainly is very exciting. Maybe we can first talk about how widely was the survey sent out, the population, the number of languages, and your global coverage and such.
Yeah, so this was a global survey. There's over 500 respondents that participated this year, which has been, we're lucky enough to have a very consistent sample size as well, year after year, when we're looking at some of these changes. And again, we're asking about a wide variety of different technologies, but we also ask questions specifically at over 20 different languages, including Java, in terms of what people were using today, what they were using in the past, as well as what they expect to use in the future. And one of the core parts of this research also was across these different industries, geographies, was asking them, these companies, what initiatives are important for them in the future, what technology trends they're planning their business around, and then how that they view the various languages and technologies out there in supporting those goals. And so very excited to share some of those results and also talk about how Java stacked up against the ecosystem at large.
Yeah, it's one of the power of having conversation around something that's been around for 26 plus years.
Yeah,
a lot of history to talk about. But I think what the audience really cares about is where has the technology been recently and where is it heading to drive and impact the future. And in the past, we used to talk a lot about Java in edge devices, in the IoT domain, and measuring the number of JVMs there and so on. Certainly in the last few years, it's all about the cloud, cloud native development and transformation and migration to the cloud. What are you seeing? Are you observing the same thing with Java land?
Yeah, so it's really interesting, as you said, to watch over now 26 plus years the history of Java and going or how it has really continued to evolve around that original vision, kind of write once, run anywhere, where we've seen it go from M2M to IoT to the edge to the cloud and back, and it really has proven to be a very powerful platform for organizations across a range of different use cases and business needs. And, in fact, if you look back, even just over the past 3 years, again, in the context, this is something that's been around for quite some time now. We've seen the use rate continue to tick up over past years. So people are still seeing more and more use cases and utility for Java for their business problems. And, we see that going forward. When we ask developers what they expect to use in the future, Java was the top of choice for those developers. And to your question on cloud, obviously that has been a big trend impacting the market at large. We have over half of the developers we surveyed said that they were currently developing for the cloud or deploying in the cloud for their applications. And when we ask those developers, those that are using the cloud today, which again is only going up, Java was rated as the #1 language in terms of importance to their organization going forward. But also in the midst of all those trends that we've seen as well, not to take away from the importance of cloud, because that is an undercurrent for all of these projects today. But we've seen Java kind of rise to the top for a number of different trends these organizations are looking to navigate beyond that. So whether it's analytics or security, data management, microservices, blockchain, there's a number of different trends that we touched on in our research, and Java was, if not the top, within the top 3 for all of them. And again, that's in the context where we asked about 22 different languages. And because again, you can understand there's a lot of different needs in organizations, a lot of technologies out there. And by and large, that undercurrent, that theme that we saw again and again was organizations turning to Java to address many of those next generation trends.
Yeah, it's heartening to hear that in such a summarized manner. We hear this in interactions with our customers on a daily basis, but to put it all together with the flood survey, it just re-energizes when you hear that. How many trends were there? Something like 13, 15, well, how many trends?
Yeah, so there were 14 trends that we rated, and that was has stayed fairly consistent over these past 4 years. We've been doing this survey, and actually, maybe it's surprising to you, maybe not. But one thing that stood out to me is that when I look back over this past 4 years, the top 5 trends have stayed pretty consistent just in terms of what those are. At the bottom, that has kind of come and gone. I mean, to your point, years ago, like IoT was much higher on that list, but now that's, just cost of doing business almost in certain industries. Other things like security, for example, that has risen up, over the past few years, becoming more and more important to organizations, where it has been at the top of the list for a while, but now it's really lapping the field in terms of how much organizations are focusing on that as an important part of their landscape from an IT and development perspective.
Yeah, in some regards, security is not a surprise, right? It is it's front and center to all of the executive decisions, front and center to day-to-day operations, ensuring not only can you serve your customers, but keep your infrastructure running without impeding the performance and so on. Any particular stats that might come out from the survey? Certainly, rising in importance, but any data points there?
Yeah, so certainly, as I mentioned, that's one thing that stood out, was just seeing that even directionally, something that is already viewed as so critically important to an organization has just continued to gain steam there. At one level, to your point, it makes a lot of sense, so that everything is more connected, more parts of business value are connected to software, so more exposure, more risk. So again, all aligns to that value proposition there. And now there are over 55% of the organizations represented in our survey said they have strategic imperatives or organizational strategy targeting security. So not just reactive as something, they have to fix, but they recognize it as important to their organization in the future. But something else, the other side of that coin, apart from being, recognizing that it's something that's important to do, it was when we asked developers about their top development challenges. So separate from what business strategies are and what those, edicts from above are, security was also the #1 challenge that they cited. Everything, that has big picture things, even like just headcount, so normally when we do these surveys, or traditionally at least, just having more developers is always the biggest thing, working against deadlines, people just trying to get things done. But security is now top of that list as well. One thing that was really interesting, just to talk about Java for a minute in this context, is for one, when we asked people about the value of different languages in approaching security as an organizational initiative, Java was rated #1 for its ability to address those goals. Secondarily, when we actually looked at those developers that were using Java today in their current projects, and we asked that same question I said before about what the top development challenges were, security wasn't the top of the list. It wasn't even the top 5. It was right around number 10. So not to say that it's not still something that people have to work around, but it shows that when tapping into that ecosystem, that platform, it's not as much of a stressor for them where they're not thinking about it much. And I think that really just reinforces what we're seeing when people then, self-identify Java as being very powerful in helping them meet those business goals.
Yeah, and as you look at large organizations and enterprises where they have to deal with hundreds, if not thousands, of applications, it gives you a little bit peace of mind. Your risk parameters are perhaps just that much better. If you could go back to our touch on the cloud for a second, have you seen any changes in the usage there, particularly when it comes to Java in the cloud? There's in my mind, misperception sometimes and erroneous conversations around, is Java ready for the cloud? So what does the study tell us?
Yeah, so it's beyond ready, it's there. So this is something else that we've been looking at for quite some time. And so one, obviously, cloud, as I mentioned before, it's now fundamental. It's universal in what development organizations are looking to do and how they're thinking and planning about their next generation deployments. But it's also just touching, as I mentioned before as well, all portions of the software development lifecycle, right? Not just design, but deployment. And against those, I guess, both of those lenses, Java's rated number one is most valuable to those organizations. So not only how they're rating it, qualitatively, but also in terms of use, it's much higher than any other language choice for those projects that are using cloud today. And so I think as we look forward, we can see how that's going to continue to reinforce itself. And in fact, one of the other things we looked at in this study was how much Java is out there today, how many JVMs. And I mentioned that's something we've been looking at the past half dozen years. Part of it grounded in the long established success of Java in certain devices as well, but also for cloud-based implementations. And that's something where it's, overall we're looking at JVMs to grow over 80 billion and nearly 70% of those by 2025 being cloud connected as well. So that's growing double digits every year. Just more and more systems out there, attached to the cloud running Java. And so not only is the survey data showing that they're using it today, that they value it, but we're also just seeing it out in the wild. So it's clear that it's beyond just being, cloud ready. It's out there today.
It's out there today, and projected to continue to lead the way.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So, Java leads the way on-prem and continues to do so in the cloud. Yeah, and it's good to see that reinforcement. When you talk about efficiency when looking at languages used for development purposes, we have always felt and have touted the efficiency for the users and the development of the OpenJDK focus on ease of use by the developers, and developer efficiency is really top of mind for Java development innovation. Anything in your studies? I think last year's study actually had a specific data points. Any trends there?
Yes, and yes, there is. But first, I want to just harken back to that other point we were just discussing, where we've already established, mind you, that in our sample, in our study, that those projects using Java are more likely to use cloud. And more likely to align with many of these next generation trends alongside that, right? So they're more complex, more sophisticated projects as a baseline. Not only that, developers using Java, their projects are also more likely to be on time or ahead of schedule. And to your point, that's something we've seen in past years too. So this isn't a single year anomaly. This is a consistent trend where we're seeing those organizations that are investing using Java are seeing returns. It's always hard to identify the true points of causality on why that is, right? That's always one of the things we look for. But one thing I can say that certainly aligns with my hypothesis on why is that this is, as we've discussed, it's an ecosystem that is mature, that's been around. There are organizations like Oracle that provide commercial support in the background as well. And there's a whole lot of developers out there, millions of developers that have a background in Java. So not only are you tapping into a mature and bulletproof software platform, but there's an ecosystem of expertise that is available for organizations to tap into, so that they're more likely to have what they need to make sure that there's no unforeseen issues or curveballs beyond anything they can control to help ensure that they stay on schedule and get to market as quickly as possible.
In other words, if you want to get your projects done on time, go with Java.
Well, it's what the data points do, at least.
Yeah. No, certainly.
Yeah.
One of the things that piqued my interest in the study here was around cost savings. And we've kind of anecdotally heard that it's sometimes hard to pinpoint that, using a platform A versus B. Do you get cost savings? Do you not get, and is it efficiency and so on? How are you tackling or measuring that dimension?
Yeah, so once again, it bears out that there's savings to be had. So organizations using Java, their total cost of development. So it's everything from licensing to labor costs, they're saving money. I think on average, the project not using Java costs over 20% more to complete. So again, it may not be always apples to apples, but especially since we said many times those Java projects are already more complicated, more likely to tap into some of those trends in cloud and otherwise. But there's cost savings that are had. And this, once again, is something that we've seen in the past, both in the project overall looking at enterprise development, but even in a similar study that I did, I think it was 7-8 years ago, looking at Java for M2M and embedded devices. We saw that same trend. So this is consistent that organizations are finding ways to save money when they're using Java. So, I guess it also just aligns what we said on schedule, right? If something is more predictable, there's less likely to be cost overruns associated with more development time. And with, labor often the biggest cost driver for these projects, it makes sense then that, yes, not only are they more on time, but that itself leads to these organizations being able to save costs.
I wanted to get a more qualitative perspective from VDC. So at Oracle, as you well know, we focus on performance, security, stability, developer efficiency, when the prioritization is done on innovations on the OpenJDK itself, on the platform itself. And then when we look at how do we serve our customers and make their lives easier, we try to think about the management layer. So things like Advanced Management Console or the more recently released Java Management Service, or the performance enhancement, polyglot compiler, which is GraalVM Enterprise, things that would make it more efficient, more powerful, easier to manage, things that the enterprise and large organization would really care about. We package that together as the Oracle Java SE subscription. As somebody who's been looking at the Java stats for many years now, perspective on value that is bringing to the marketplace.
Yeah, so I mean, we've certainly seen, after, admittedly questions after the acquisition happened of Sun years ago. We had questions in terms of what direction Oracle would go, and what we've seen past, couple of years in particular is continued investment in that ecosystem, driving it forward. And one thing that's really interesting to see too is starting last year, we added some additional questions to this kind of longitudinal research study that we have going with you all, where we ask questions about perception, not just of the language, but of Oracle's stewardship of the ecosystem. And we saw it not only just looking at overall favorable results when we asked, about perception of Oracle and Java and the different subscription offerings, which is always good to see at a baseline. But we also, even year over year, as you can see on the slide here, saw incremental improvement. So people continue to buy into that and see the value that's being added. So one example is Oracle had been very highly rated the first time we asked a question about the stewardship of the open source ecosystem, and we've seen now that perception get even better year over year. And as organizations look towards a cloud-first future, we also have seen that Oracle's move to support the cloud development and innovation around that OCI offering as well, and where that integration is viewed quite highly by the ecosystem. And it on a 7-point Likert scale, that was rated at over a 5, which, if you have any familiarity with how these surveys work, where oftentimes people are net neutral or biased to the negative, that's quite fantastic, to not mince words, in terms of how that research bore out. And so, all in all, I think it really shows a lot of these data points here on this slide, but also just how Oracle was, across these 14 trends, always in the top 3, as I mentioned. So it's, there's the kind of proofs in the pudding, so to speak. We've seen where the ecosystem has reacted quite positively. We've seen adoption of Java re-accelerate over the past few years. And it's clear that it is a very trusted, actually the most trusted language for both current but also expected in the future development. And that doesn't matter if it's native, it doesn't matter if it's cloud. Oracle is recognized as being a very, very valuable arrow in the quiver of today's software developer.
It's great. Thanks, Chris. Great to hear the recent data corroborate some of the things that we have seen over many years, but also some new data that continues to indicate that Java is not just technology for today, but truly driving the trends for tomorrow.